No. No, it should be blue. Why is it pink? I said I wanted a son.
When the toxicology report came back, the medical examiner knew immediately. This was murder. Industrial strength acid. Injected directly into the bloodstream. At a party. In front of nearly 40 witnesses. But here's what made this case different. Nobody saw it happen. The killer embraced his victim while everyone watched. 2 seconds of contact. 1 lethal dose. Perfect execution. By the time anyone realized something was wrong, the poison was already destroying her from the inside out. She was 35 years old, 20 weeks pregnant, surrounded by people who loved her. And she died anyway, because the most dangerous person in her life was the one standing closest. She wasn't supposed to die that day.
5:30, we're north of the alleyway, please first street, Roxbury inside.
Jasmine Carter woke up on July 27, 2019, with nothing but excitement in her heart. At 35 years old, she was about to celebrate the life growing inside her, a 6th daughter she already loved fiercely. But before we understand how her story ended in a suburban Philadelphia backyard, we need to know who she really was. Jasmine wasn't just a headline or a victim. She was a dreamer, a fighter, and a woman who refused to give up on the people she loved, even when loving them cost her everything. Jasmine was born in 1984 on Detroit's East Side, where auto plants provided the rhythm of daily life. Her father clocked 30 years on the Ford assembly line, coming home with oil under his fingernails and stories about the cars he helped build. Her mother worked night shifts as a nursing assistant at Detroit Receiving Hospital. Jasmine was the middle child between 2 brothers who teased her relentlessly but protected her fiercely. The family didn't have much money, but they had a tight bond forged in a church community that believed in lifting each other up. Sunday mornings meant packed pews, gospel music that shook the walls, and potluck dinners where everyone's grandmother claimed to make the best peach cobbler. What set Jasmine apart was her mind. While other kids struggled with math homework, Jasmine solved equations like puzzles. Science fascinated her, the way chemicals combined, the way the human body healed itself, the way small innovations could save lives. At 16, she won first place at Michigan State Science Fair with a renewable energy project. Her father cried that day, not because he understood the science, but because he understood what it meant. His daughter was going to be the first in their family to attend college. Howard University offered a full scholarship in 2002, and Jasmine packed her bags for Washington, D.C., ready to study biomedical engineering. She wanted to create medical devices for underserved communities like the neighborhood she came from. Her dorm room was covered in equations and sketches of prosthetics and diagnostic tools. She became president of Women in STEM, volunteered at children's hospitals on weekends, and graduated magna cum laude in 2006. Professors told her she could work anywhere, but Jasmine chose Philadelphia, close enough to visit her parents, enrolling at Drexel University for graduate school while working part-time at a pharmaceutical research lab. In spring 2005, during her junior year at Howard, Jasmine met Devin Carter at a campus ministry event. He pursued her with intense focus, flowers at her dorm, good morning texts every day, declarations that she was the smartest, most beautiful woman he'd ever met. Some friends had concerns, saying he came on too strong, that he didn't like when she spent time with anyone else. But Jasmine believed in seeing the best in people. She thought his intensity meant passion. 8 months later, he proposed. Her mother flew in from Detroit for the wedding in June 2006, a large traditional ceremony where Jasmine wore white and smiled for every photograph, believing she was marrying her future. Those early years should have been a warning. The way Devin's face changed when the ultrasound said, "It's a girl," in December 2006. The way he left the hospital within an hour of their first daughter's birth. The way his excitement about fatherhood vanished when he realized it meant raising daughters, not sons. But Jasmine made excuses. She told herself he was adjusting, that his disappointment would fade. She didn't recognize the pattern forming, the foundation being laid for something darker. She just kept hoping he'd change, kept believing that love could fix what was broken inside him. Before we go further into Jasmine's story, if you're finding this as devastating and important as we do, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with others. Stories like Jasmine's need to be told, and your support helps us continue bringing these crucial documentaries to light. Devin Carter didn't look like a murderer. At 37 years old, he was the kind of man who commanded respect without saying a word. Well-dressed, well-spoken, with a smile that could charm anyone who didn't look too closely at his eyes. Co-workers called him ambitious. Neighbors called him a devoted father. His church community called him a man of faith. But people closest to him had different words: controlling, cold, obsessed. Beneath the charm was something terrifying. A man who believed his wife existed to give him what he wanted, and when she couldn't deliver a son, she became disposable. Devin was born in 1982 in Richmond, Virginia, into a family where gender determined worth. His father was a military veteran who ran their household like a boot camp. His mother was an elementary school teacher who deferred to her husband on everything. Devin was the only son among 4 children, and his father made it clear he carried a burden his sisters never would. "The family name dies with you if you don't have sons," his father told him repeatedly. Devin watched his father's disappointment every time one of his sisters was born. That poison seeped into Devin's understanding of the world. Sons mattered. Daughters were acceptable, but they weren't enough. In high school, Devin earned straight A's and starred on the basketball team, leading them to a regional championship his senior year. Teachers loved him because he was articulate and respectful. But his girlfriend that year, a young woman named Tanya, saw something different. Years later, when detectives tracked her down, she told them about feeling suffocated. "He needed to know where I was every single moment. If I went to the mall with friends, he'd show up unannounced. If I talked to another guy, he'd interrogate me for hours. Everything had to be his way. When I broke up with him, he showed up at my house for weeks, trying to convince me I was making a mistake. Looking back now, I dodged something terrible." Devin earned a business scholarship to Virginia Commonwealth University, where his need for control intensified. He joined a fraternity and quickly climbed to leadership, organizing events and managing finances. Brothers remembered him as someone who always needed to win every argument. One former member recalled, "We were playing pickup basketball, just messing around, and Devin's team lost. It was meaningless. But Devin stormed off the court, wouldn't talk to anyone for the rest of the day. Like losing, even in something that didn't matter, was a personal insult." After graduating in 2004 with a finance degree, Devin moved to Philadelphia for a position at a mid-sized investment firm. He was aggressive, competitive, willing to work 80-hour weeks to close deals. Within 3 years, he'd climbed to senior associate. When Devin met Jasmine at that ministry event in 2005, he saw exactly what he wanted: beautiful, intelligent, ambitious, from a good family. She had the kind of warmth that made people feel safe, and Devin wanted that light for himself. He pursued her relentlessly, showering her with attention and grand romantic gestures. Some thought it was sweet. Others thought it was excessive, how he monopolized her time, how he'd get upset if she made plans without him, how he needed constant reassurance. Jasmine saw the best in people. She interpreted his intensity as proof he cared. She didn't recognize red flags. When he proposed after 8 months, she accepted without hesitation. The wedding in June 2006 was everything Jasmine dreamed of: a large ceremony with family and friends, promises of forever spoken before God. In photographs from that day, Jasmine is radiant, beaming with genuine joy. Devin stands beside her, handsome in his tuxedo, his smile perfect for pictures. But if you look closely, if you really study his expression, you can see something the guests missed. His smile doesn't quite reach his eyes. His hand on Jasmine's waist is possessive, not tender. In one candid shot, captured when he thought no one was looking, his face is completely blank. No joy, no excitement, just calculation. That photograph would later become evidence, a moment frozen in time showing the truth. Devin Carter never loved his wife. He loved what she represented. And when she couldn't give him what he really wanted, she stopped representing anything at all. The mask stayed on for a while, long enough for Jasmine to believe she'd made the right choice, long enough for her to get pregnant, long enough for hope to bloom. But that mask was fragile, and the moment that first ultrasound revealed a daughter, it began to crack. The hospital nurse present for Devin and Jasmine's first daughter's birth would never forget December 2006. Jasmine had labored for 14 hours, and when the baby finally arrived, a healthy girl with a strong cry, the room should have filled with celebration. Instead, it filled with silence. Devin stood in the corner, arms crossed, staring at the newborn with what the nurse later described as complete detachment, like he was looking at a stranger's baby. When the nurse placed the infant in his arms, he held her awkwardly for less than 30 seconds before handing her back. "I need to make some calls," he said, and walked out. He didn't return for over an hour. The nurse pulled Jasmine's mother aside later and said, "Keep an eye on that man. Something's not right there." Jasmine made excuses. She told herself he was overwhelmed, that men processed fatherhood differently. She named the baby Kennedy, hoping the strong presidential name might make Devin proud. It didn't. In weeks following Kennedy's birth, Devin became increasingly absent. He worked late every night, avoided diaper changes and feedings, claiming he didn't want to wake the baby with his clumsy attempts. Jasmine's journal from January 2007, recovered by police after her death, contains a heartbreaking entry. Devin says he loves Kennedy, but something in his eyes went cold when the doctor said, "It's a girl. I keep telling myself I'm imagining it. But late at night, when I'm feeding her alone, I wonder if he resents us both." Financial control started gradually. First, Devin suggested they combine bank accounts for simplicity, since she'd paused graduate school to care for Kennedy. Then he started reviewing credit card statements, questioning every purchase. Do we really need to spend $40 on baby clothes when we just bought some last month? Jasmine, wanting to avoid conflict, started asking permission before buying anything. She'd text him from the grocery store, listing what she planned to purchase, waiting for approval. Detectives later found hundreds of these messages, Jasmine requesting, Devin either granting permission or denying it, treating her like a child asking for allowance. Then came isolation. Devin started making comments about Jasmine's friends being bad influences or always causing drama. When her best friend Monica called, Devin would answer and say Jasmine was sleeping, even when she was awake in the next room. When Jasmine's mother wanted to visit from Detroit, Devin suddenly had important work trips scheduled, making it inconvenient to host guests. He never outright forbade Jasmine from seeing people, which would have been too obvious. Instead, he made it difficult, uncomfortable, exhausting. Eventually, it became easier for Jasmine to just stay home, isolated with Kennedy. Her support network slowly drifted away because Devin had carefully built walls around his wife. By late 2007, Devin was pushing for another baby. Not because he wanted more children, but because he wanted a second chance at getting a son. Jasmine wasn't ready. Kennedy was barely a year old, and something about Devin's intensity frightened her. But he was relentless. "We need to try for a boy. Kennedy needs a brother. Every family needs a son to carry on the name." When Jasmine hesitated, suggesting they wait, Devin's mood would darken. He'd give her the silent treatment for days, making her feel like she'd disappointed him, like she was failing as a wife. Finally, exhausted from emotional manipulation, Jasmine agreed. She got pregnant in early 2008, and for a few weeks Devin's mood improved. But then came the second ultrasound in May 2008, and the technician's cheerful announcement, "Another girl." Devin's face went blank. He stood up without a word and walked out of the examination room, leaving Jasmine alone on the table, half naked under a paper gown, humiliated and terrified. Their second daughter, Aaliyah, was born in October 2008, and this time Devin didn't even pretend to be happy. He didn't visit the hospital until the next day, claiming urgent work. When he finally arrived, he barely looked at the baby. Jasmine's mother, who'd flown in from Detroit, watched with growing alarm. That night, she pulled Jasmine aside. "Baby, something's wrong with that man. This isn't normal. You need to think about whether this is the life you want." But Jasmine defended him. "He's just stressed about money, Mama. We have 2 babies now. He'll come around." Her mother left Philadelphia 3 days later, worried but helpless. You can't save someone who doesn't think they need saving. Over the next year, Devon's resentment hardened into something meaner. He started making cruel jokes about Jasmine's inability to produce sons. At a family barbecue in summer 2009, he said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Guess I married a girl factory." People laughed awkwardly. Jasmine smiled, pretending it didn't hurt. Once Devon decided you'd failed him, you stopped being human in his eyes. You became a problem. We want to know, where are you watching this from? Drop your location in the comments below. And if you've made it to this point in Jasmine's heartbreaking story, comment, "I'm still here," so we can see who's staying with us through this difficult but important case. When Jasmine gave birth to her 3rd daughter, Jordan, in March 2010, Devon didn't bother hiding his anger anymore. A labor and delivery nurse documented that father became visibly angry when, informed of infant's gender, left the room without holding baby, did not return for several hours. When he finally came back, he stood at the doorway like a stranger. No flowers, no balloons, no tender words, just cold silence. Jasmine tried to fill that silence with forced cheerfulness, chattering about how Jordan had Jasmine's nose and Devon's chin. Devon listened without responding, then left after 10 excruciating minutes. Jasmine cried herself to sleep that night, her newborn beside her, wondering what she'd done to deserve this treatment. By this point, Devon had 4 daughters under age 4, and financial strain was severe. Childcare, diapers, formula, clothes the girls outgrew every few months. It all added up. Devon started working longer hours, but promotions weren't coming as fast as he'd hoped. The resentment he felt about having daughters now had a monetary component too. Each girl represented another mouth to feed, another college fund he'd never afford, another expensive wedding someday. He began making comments at work about his situation. A colleague named Trevor, who would later testify at trial, remembered him saying, "I'm drowning in pink at home. 4 girls and counting. My buddy has 2 boys and life is easy for him." When Trevor tried to say something positive about daughters, Devon cut him off. "You don't understand. You have sons. That's different. That's what matters." Devon's obsession with having a son stopped being private. His office at the investment firm contained files on natural gender selection techniques, articles printed from medical websites about diet changes, timing conception, even dubious supplements promising to increase chances of male offspring. Co-workers walking past his desk would see these papers scattered around. They found it strange but said nothing. After all, wanting a particular gender isn't a crime. But the intensity of Devon's research, the way he talked about it constantly, the way his entire mood depended on this one thing he couldn't control, that should have been a warning sign. Each daughter experienced their father's rejection differently, and the trauma manifested in heartbreaking ways. Kennedy, the eldest, remembered specific moments that shaped her childhood. She was 6 years old when she overheard her father on the phone with a friend saying, "I got stuck with all girls. Not one son. Can you imagine?" She didn't understand all the words, but she understood the tone. Disappointment. Resentment. She started trying to be the son he wanted, playing with trucks instead of dolls, asking to learn basketball, cutting her hair short. Nothing worked. Devon still looked through her like she was invisible. Aaliyah, the second daughter, developed a different coping mechanism. She became quiet, almost mute at home, speaking only when directly asked a question. At school, teachers described her as withdrawn. At home, she'd watch her father come and go without ever making eye contact with her. Once, when she was 5, she made him a Father's Day card at school, carefully coloring it and writing, "I love you, Daddy," in wobbly letters. She left it on his desk. He threw it away without comment. She found it in the trash later that day and never made him another card. Jordan, born third, internalized her father's rejection as proof that something was wrong with her. She developed anxiety around age 4, asking her mother questions like, "Why doesn't Daddy like me?" And, "If I was a boy, would Daddy love me?" Jasmine would hold her and cry, telling her that Daddy did love her, but Jordan could feel the lie in those words. Children always know the truth, even when adults try to hide it. In 2012, Jasmine gave birth to their 4th daughter, Taylor. By now, the pattern was established. Devin's face would darken at every ultrasound. He'd leave the hospital soon after delivery. He'd make cruel comments disguised as jokes. He'd withdraw emotionally and financially. But this time was different. Jasmine started noticing bruises on her arms she couldn't explain. Little ones at first, on her wrists and upper arms, in places where fingers might grip too hard. She told co-workers at the medical supply company where she'd returned to work part-time that she was clumsy. Her best friend Monica knew better. Monica had seen Jasmine flinch when Devin raised his voice, watched her become smaller, quieter, more apologetic over the years. One afternoon in late 2012, Monica sat Jasmine down at a coffee shop and said what nobody else would. "He's hurting you, isn't he?" The question hung in the air. Jasmine could have denied it. Instead, she started crying. Quiet tears that spoke of deep exhaustion. "It's not that bad," she whispered, which is what every abuse victim says. "He just gets frustrated sometimes. The money is tight, the girls are loud, work is stressful. It's not his fault." Monica reached across the table and gripped her friend's hands. "None of that makes it okay for him to hurt you. You know that, right?" Jasmine nodded, but the nodding meant nothing. She went home that night to the man who was slowly erasing who she used to be, and she stayed. Because leaving felt impossible. Because she had 4 little girls who needed stability. Because she still believed Devin would change. In January 2015, their 5th daughter, Skylar, was born. Devin didn't visit the hospital for 2 entire days. When he finally showed up, he stood in the doorway, looked at Jasmine holding their newborn, and said 5 words that froze her blood. "This is your fault." Jasmine's mother heard those words, and something inside her shattered. Later that night, she tried one more time. "Baby, this man is dangerous. Please come home to Detroit. Bring the girls. We'll figure it out together." But Jasmine shook her head. The girls were in school. They had friends, routines, stability. Moving them felt cruel. And maybe, just maybe, if she gave Devin a little more time, he'd finally accept the family they had. Little Skylar, even at 4 days old, seemed to sense her father's rejection. She cried more than the other babies had, as if she could feel the cold absence where paternal love should have been. Jasmine stared at the positive pregnancy test in her bathroom, hands trembling, and felt something she'd never felt with previous pregnancies. Pure terror. It was March 2019. She was 34 years old, exhausted from raising 5 daughters while working part-time under Devin's increasingly tight control. Another baby meant more financial strain. Another ultrasound revealing gender. Another moment where Devin's face would either light up or darken with rage. Jasmine had learned to fear those moments. This time, that dread felt like a warning her body was trying to send her, a premonition she couldn't quite name but felt in every cell. She sat on the bathroom floor for 20 minutes before she found the courage to tell her husband. She waited 2 weeks, buying time to figure out how to frame the news without triggering his anger. During those 2 weeks, Jasmine barely slept. She'd lie awake at night, one hand on her flat stomach, having silent conversations with the life growing inside her. "I'll protect you," she'd whisper in the darkness. "No matter what he says, no matter what he wants, I'll protect you." She rehearsed different ways to tell him. Maybe over dinner, when he was relaxed. Maybe on a weekend morning, when he was in a good mood. But Devin was never in a good mood anymore. The tension in their house was a living thing, thick and suffocating. When she finally told him one evening in late March, Devin was eating dinner and scrolling through his phone. "I'm pregnant," Jasmine said quietly. Devin stopped mid-bite. He put his fork down slowly, deliberately. Then he looked at her with an expression she'd never seen before. Complete calculation. For 3 entire days he didn't speak to her. Not a single word. On the 4th day, Devin finally broke his silence with words that made her stomach drop. "You'll get an abortion. We can't afford another girl." The demand was delivered as fact. Devin had spent those 3 silent days planning his approach. He'd researched abortion clinics in Philadelphia, printed information about procedures and costs, even called one clinic to check availability. He left the paperwork on the kitchen table where Jasmine would find it. She picked up the papers with shaking hands, read through them, and felt something inside her harden. Jasmine had spent 13 years bending to Devin's will. But this was different. This was asking her to end a life. This baby inside her was already loved, already wanted, already hers. "No," she told him that night, her voice steady for the first time in years. "I'm keeping this baby." Devin's reaction was controlled rage, which was somehow more terrifying than if he'd exploded. He didn't yell. He didn't throw things. He just looked at her, with eyes that had gone completely dead, and said, "You're being selfish. We have 5 mouths to feed already. We're drowning in debt. And you want to bring another girl into this?" Jasmine stood her ground, hand instinctively protecting her still flat stomach. "This is my child, Devin. Our child. I'm not having an abortion." The conversation ended there, but the war had just begun. Jasmine tried reaching out for help. In late March 2019, she called her mother in Detroit, voice breaking as she explained the situation. Beverly Johnson immediately offered a solution. "Come home, baby. Pack up those girls and come back to Detroit. Stay with me. We'll figure it out together." But Jasmine refused. "The girls have school here, Mama. They have friends. Their whole life is in Philadelphia. I can't just uproot them." What she didn't say was that she was terrified of what Devin would do if she tried to leave. He'd made it clear over the years that she was financially dependent on him, that she had no savings, that she couldn't make it alone. The thought of starting over with 5 children and pregnant with a 6th felt impossible. She felt trapped, paralyzed by fear and practicality. Jasmine also confided in Monica one afternoon in April, meeting at a coffee shop. "I'm scared of him. I don't know what he's going to do when he finds out the gender." Monica gripped her friend's hands tightly. "Then don't tell him. If this story is impacting you, if you're recognizing warning signs you've seen in your own life or someone else's, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with people you love. Education is protection. The more we understand about domestic violence and how it escalates, the more lives we can save from tragedies like Jasmine's. The shift in Devin happened overnight in early June 2019, and it was the kind of change that should have sent Jasmine running to the nearest police station. After weeks of cold silence and passive-aggressive warfare over her refusal to abort their 6th daughter, Devin suddenly became attentive. He came home from work with flowers, something he hadn't done in years. He cooked dinner twice that week, humming in the kitchen while Jasmine watched from the doorway, confused and cautious. He even asked about her prenatal appointments, wanted to know if she was feeling okay, if the baby was healthy. To anyone outside, it looked like Devin had finally accepted the pregnancy and was stepping up as a supportive husband. But Jasmine felt something else entirely. A cold dread settling in her bones that whispered this kindness was performative, that something was happening beneath the surface she couldn't see. What Jasmine didn't know was that Devin had entered a new phase, one that required him to appear normal, loving even, to anyone paying attention. Because what he was researching now had crossed a line from which there was no return. In Devin's mind, the decision had been made. Jasmine had defied him. She'd refused to abort a daughter he didn't want. She'd chosen this baby over his wishes, over their financial stability, over him. And in his twisted logic, that defiance had consequences. He didn't see himself as planning a murder. He saw himself as solving a problem. In his mind, he was taking necessary action that Jasmine had forced him to take. This rationalization, this complete absence of moral responsibility, is what made him so dangerous. Forensic analysts would later reconstruct his digital footprint from late May through June 2019, and what they found was chilling. Devin had moved from researching pregnancy termination to researching murder. His searches, conducted on privacy browsers and public library computers during lunch breaks, showed methodical escalation. Acid injection death time frame appeared on June 3rd. Undetectable poisons on June 7th. How long does hydrochloric acid take to kill on June 12th? He read case studies of homicides disguised as medical emergencies, downloaded articles about caustic chemical exposure, and visited forums discussing the lethality of various substances. He studied failures, cases where killers had been caught because they left evidence, used the wrong dosage, or chose the wrong setting. He was learning from their mistakes. On June 15th, Devin visited 3 different libraries across Philadelphia, using public computers to research legal defenses for crimes involving pregnant women. He read about fetal homicide laws in Pennsylvania, about how prosecutors proved intent, about cases dismissed due to lack of evidence. He was teaching himself how to commit murder and get away with it, learning from the mistakes of criminals who'd been caught. At each library, security cameras captured him sitting at computers for 30 to 40-minute sessions, his face illuminated by screen glow, completely focused. One librarian later told detectives she remembered him because he seemed intense, like he was researching for a college paper, but he was too old to be a student. She didn't think much of it then, but now, knowing what he was learning, those images take on sinister quality. The acquisition phase came next, and Devin approached it with the same methodical care he brought to his investment deals at work. On June 24th, he took a personal day off work. His boss approved it without question since Devin rarely took time off. That morning, he drove 40 minutes across state lines to Camden, New Jersey, specifically choosing a location far from home and workplace. At an industrial supply store, security footage captured him browsing the chemical aisle for nearly 15 minutes, reading labels, comparing concentrations. He picked up bottles, examined warning labels, compared pH levels and concentration percentages. He finally selected hydrochloric acid solution, industrial strength, 31% concentration, strong enough to cause severe tissue damage, but common enough not to raise suspicion. 2 days later, on June 26th, Devin visited a pharmacy in a completely different part of the city, West Philadelphia, nowhere near his home or workplace. He purchased medical-grade syringes, the kind used for intramuscular injections. The pharmacist barely looked at him. People buy syringes for legitimate medical reasons all the time. Devin bought 3, telling himself he needed backups in case something went wrong with the first. He was thinking ahead, planning for contingencies, approaching this murder the way he'd approach a business transaction. All emotion removed, just calculation and risk assessment. When he got home that evening, he went straight to the garage, where he'd been spending increasing amounts of time. Jasmine assumed he was working on projects. She had no idea he was in there practicing. Devin spent nights in that garage, door locked, working by the light of a single bulb, teaching himself to be a killer. He bought oranges and practiced injection technique, learning the angle and force needed to pierce skin, how fast to depress the plunger, how to withdraw the needle smoothly without leaving obvious marks. He timed himself, trying to get the entire process down to under 3 seconds. Speed mattered. The faster he could inject, the less likely anyone would notice what was happening. He practiced one-handed injection, since his other hand would need to hold Jasmine in an embrace. He practiced with his jacket on, reaching into the pocket, palming the syringe, executing the motion, returning it to the pocket. Hours of practice, night after night, while his wife and 5 daughters slept inside, having no idea that the man of the house was rehearsing their mother's murder. But Devin still needed the perfect opportunity, a setting that would give him cover and plausible deniability. He needed witnesses to establish that he was present, but not isolated with Jasmine. He needed chaos and emotion to mask the moment of injection. He needed a public event where a medical emergency wouldn't seem immediately suspicious. And then, one night in early July, the idea came to him fully formed: a gender reveal party. The more he thought about it, the more brilliant it seemed. Dozens of witnesses would testify that nothing unusual happened. A sudden medical emergency at a crowded party could be anything. By the time anyone figured out what really happened, he'd have his alibi established. He'd be the grieving husband who'd lost his wife and child. He'd get sympathy instead of suspicion. The plan was perfect. All he had to do was execute it. On July 5th, Devon suggested the party to Jasmine over breakfast, his tone casual and upbeat. "You know what? We should do a gender reveal party for the baby. Invite everyone. Let the girls celebrate their little sister. I was wrong to be so negative about all this. Let's make this pregnancy special." Jasmine, who'd been bracing herself for months of Cold War, nearly cried with relief. This was what she'd been hoping for. Acceptance, joy, inclusion. She hugged him, told him she loved him, said this meant the world to her. And Devon hugged her back, already calculating timelines and dosages in his head, already seeing past this moment to the moment 3 weeks from now when she'd be dead. Jasmine threw herself into planning with an energy her friends hadn't seen in years. That same afternoon, she sat at the kitchen table with a notebook, making lists while her 5 daughters played around her. Kennedy, now 13, offered to help with setup. Aaliyah asked if she could make a welcome sign for baby sister. Jordan wanted to pick out balloons. Even little Taylor and Skylar, ages 6 and 4, got caught up in the excitement, chattering about their baby sister who was coming. For the first time in years, the house felt light, happy, full of hope. Jasmine felt like maybe, finally, things were turning around. Maybe Devon had just needed time to adjust. Maybe this baby would bring their family back together. She created detailed lists, guest list, decorations needed, food menu, timeline for the day. She called friends and family with genuine excitement in her voice. "We're doing this right." The guest list grew to 38 people. Family flying in from Detroit and Richmond, church friends they hadn't seen in months, neighbors, co-workers from Jasmine's job, even some of Devon's colleagues from the investment firm. Jasmine sent invitations 3 weeks in advance, beautiful cards with pink and blue borders reading, "Join us for a special celebration as we reveal baby Carter number 6. She spent evenings addressing envelopes in her careful handwriting, adding personal notes to close friends. "Can't wait to celebrate with you," she'd write. "This baby is so loved already." She had no idea she was inviting these people to witness her murder. She rented decorations, 200 balloons, streamers, banners that said girl or boy, with question marks. She ordered a custom confetti cannon loaded with pink confetti that would explode in a burst of color when triggered. Everything was coordinated, Instagram-worthy, perfect. On July 15th, the decorations arrived, and Jasmine spread them out in the living room to show the girls. They spent that evening inflating sample balloons, practicing with streamers, getting excited about the party. Devon watched from the doorway, smiled when appropriate, and said all the right things. "It's going to be beautiful, honey. You're doing a great job." But inside, he was counting down. 12 days until the party. 12 days until it was over. Meanwhile, Devon was planning too, but his preparations had nothing to do with barbecue or balloons. While Jasmine coordinated RSVPs and ordered supplies, Devon was in the garage every night, perfecting his technique. He'd transferred the acid into the syringe, calculating exact dosage based on Jasmine's weight and the concentration of the solution. Too little might not. It worked fast enough. Too much might be immediately detectable by smell, might cause her to scream instantly, might alert people before he could step away. He settled on 15 milliliters, enough to cause catastrophic damage, but not so much that the chemical odor would be overwhelming outdoors, where air circulation would help disperse the smell. Devon rehearsed his emotional response, and this part was almost as important as the physical act. He stood in front of the garage mirror, practicing shocked expressions, horrified gasps, the kind of face a loving husband would make if his wife suddenly collapsed. He practiced his phone call to emergency services, memorizing what he'd say, how panicked he'd sound. "My wife just collapsed. She's pregnant. Please send help immediately." He recorded himself on his phone, played it back, adjusted his tone. Not too calm, which would seem suspicious. Not too hysterical, which might not be believable. Somewhere in between, shocked, scared, but trying to hold it together to help. He even practiced crying, working himself up emotionally by thinking about consequences if he got caught, the life in prison he'd face. But those weren't tears of remorse or fear for Jasmine. They were tears of frustration at the thought of failure, of his plan not working, of losing his freedom. Devin didn't feel guilty about what he was planning. He felt justified. In his twisted logic, Jasmine had forced this situation by refusing to abort a daughter he didn't want. She'd left him no choice. This was self-preservation, not murder. This was her fault. The date was set for Saturday, July 27, 2019, party starting at 2 in the afternoon. Devin chose the timing carefully, early enough that people wouldn't be tired or ready to leave, late enough that summer sun would be high and hot, making people less likely to notice small details. He'd hidden the filled syringe in a locked toolbox in the garage, wrapped in cloth to prevent any accidental exposure or leakage. On the morning of the party, he'd transfer it to his jacket pocket right before guests arrived. Everything was calculated down to the minute. The confetti cannon would explode at approximately 2:02, creating perfect distraction. Everyone would be looking at pink confetti, cheering and celebrating. That's when he'd pull Jasmine into what everyone would think was a loving embrace. That's when he'd inject her. And by the time anyone realized something was wrong, the syringe would be back in his pocket, and he'd be playing the role of his life, the devastated husband witnessing his wife's inexplicable medical emergency. Saturday, July 27, 2019, dawned bright and clear over Levittown, Pennsylvania. The temperature was forecast to reach 82 degrees by afternoon. Not too hot, but warm enough for a comfortable outdoor party. At 6:30 in the morning, Jasmine's house was already stirring with excited energy. 5 daughters, ages 4 to 13, were too keyed up about the party to sleep late. Skylar, the youngest, came bouncing into her parents' bedroom, asking if it was time to set up yet. Jasmine, 20 weeks pregnant and feeling the aches that came with carrying a child while chasing 5 others, smiled through exhaustion and told Skylar to wake her sisters so they could start breakfast together. Devin was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing. When Jasmine asked if he was okay, he said he was just thinking about the day ahead. She kissed his cheek and headed downstairs to make pancakes. The kitchen filled with the sounds of family in motion, bacon sizzling, orange juice being poured, girls arguing over who got which color plate. Jasmine moved through the chaos with practiced ease, flipping pancakes while refereeing arguments and reminding Kennedy to help her younger sisters. A neighbor who happened to glance through the kitchen window while walking her dog that morning would later tell police. She was laughing at something one of the girls said. She had this glow about her. You could tell she was excited. You could tell she had no idea this would be her last morning. Devin came downstairs around 7:15, already showered and dressed, which was unusual for a Saturday. Jasmine noticed but didn't comment. He helped set up folding tables in the backyard without being asked, carried chairs from the garage, arranged them in a semicircle. To anyone watching, he looked like a devoted husband preparing for his wife's party. But his movements were mechanical, his mind clearly elsewhere. At one point, Kennedy approached him to ask if he was excited about the baby, and Devin's response was so delayed that she had to repeat the question. "Yeah, sure," he finally said, not looking at her. Kennedy walked away feeling dismissed, which was normal. Her father had made her feel invisible her entire life. Around 9 in the morning, Jasmine's mother, Beverly Johnson, arrived from Detroit after a 6-hour overnight drive. The reunion on the front porch was emotional. Beverly wrapped her daughter in a tight hug, commenting on how big her belly had gotten, how beautiful she looked. "You're glowing, baby. This one's going to be special, I can feel it." Jasmine started crying, overwhelmed by having her mother there. They stood there hugging for a long moment, and Beverly felt her daughter trembling slightly. "You okay?" she asked quietly. Jasmine nodded, wiping tears. "I'm just so glad you're here, Mama. I needed you." There was something in the way she said it that made Beverly study her daughter's face more carefully. She saw exhaustion there, and something that might have been fear, but before she could ask more questions, the grandchildren came spilling onto the porch, demanding attention. Devin's parents arrived from Richmond around 9:30. His father, still the stern military veteran who rarely smiled, his mother warm but deferring to her husband. They brought gifts for the granddaughters, dolls and coloring books and candy. Devin greeted them cordially, helped unload their car, but Beverly noticed he barely made eye contact with his own parents. There was a stiffness to the interaction that felt wrong. When Beverly tried to make conversation with Devin, asking how work was going, he gave one-word answers and excused himself to check on the grill. "That man's always been strange," Beverly muttered to her daughter. "Cold as ice." Jasmine immediately defended him. "He's just stressed about the party going well." By 10:30, the backyard was fully decorated. Pink and blue balloons tied to the fence swayed in the gentle breeze. Streamers crisscrossed the porch. Tables were covered with checkered tablecloths, ready for food. The confetti cannon sat on a small stand in the center of the yard. Jasmine walked through the space, checking details, adjusting balloon heights, making sure everything was perfect. She was wearing comfortable maternity clothes, planning to change into her party dress closer to 2 o'clock. Her best friend Monica called to confirm she was coming. "Just yourself," Jasmine said, her voice bright with happiness. "I can't wait for you to be here." At noon, with 2 hours until party time, Jasmine went upstairs to shower and get ready. She took her time, washing her hair, doing her makeup carefully. She chose a beautiful flowing maternity dress in shades of pink and blue. Standing in front of the bathroom mirror, she looked at her reflection. 35 years old, pregnant with her 6th child. Tired, but hopeful. She put on the necklace her mother had given her years ago, a simple gold chain with a heart pendant. Then she placed both hands on her belly and whispered words only meant for the baby. "Today, we celebrate you, little one. Today, everyone sees how loved you are." It was a tender moment, a mother blessing her unborn child, and it was being observed by Death, because downstairs in the garage, Devin was retrieving the syringe. He wrapped it carefully, slid it into his jacket pocket, and felt the weight settle against his ribs. 2 hours until showtime. Thank you so much for your incredible support in watching this difficult but important story. This channel exists because of viewers like you who believe these cases need to be told. If you want to support our work even further, consider joining our YouTube membership for exclusive content and behind-the-scenes access to how we research and create these documentaries. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, cars started lining the street outside the Carter house. Neighbors noticed increased activity, clusters of people carrying covered dishes and gift bags, the sound of children's laughter drifting from the backyard. The first to arrive were the Williams family from church, Pastor James Williams, his wife Angela, and their 3 children. They hadn't seen Jasmine and Devin at services in over 6 months, but Jasmine's invitation had been so warm, so personal, they couldn't refuse. "We've missed you at church," Angela said, embracing Jasmine. "But I understand life gets busy with 5 little ones." Jasmine smiled, grateful they'd come, not mentioning that the real reason they'd stopped attending was Devin's increasing isolation tactics. Church friends continued arriving, people Jasmine and Devin hadn't seen in months. Monica arrived at 1:15 with her 2 children, and when she saw Jasmine, the 2 friends embraced tightly. They'd known each other since Jasmine moved to Philadelphia for graduate school 14 years ago, had been through job changes and marriages and births together. Monica pulled back and studied her friend's face carefully. She saw happiness there, genuine joy, but also saw exhaustion underneath. Dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. A tension in her shoulders that suggested she wasn't as relaxed as she appeared. "You okay?" Monica asked quietly, gripping her friend's hands. Jasmine nodded quickly. Maybe too quickly. "I'm great. Today's been perfect. Devin's been so helpful, and everyone's here, and I just feel blessed." Monica wanted to believe her, wanted to think Devin had actually changed, and Jasmine's hope hadn't been misplaced. So she smiled, squeezed her friend's hand, and let herself be pulled into the party atmosphere. Later, she would replay this moment 1,000 times, wondering if she should have pushed harder, asked more questions, trusted her instinct that something was wrong beneath Jasmine's cheerful surface. By 1:30, the backyard was filling with 38 people. The Martinez family from 3 houses down brought folding chairs and homemade salsa. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson from across the street came with their teenage son. Devon's co-workers from the investment firm arrived with wine and beer, congregating near the grill where Devon was cooking. They clapped him on the back, made jokes about having 6 kids, asked if he was hoping for a boy this time. "Man, 6 kids? You're a brave man," one colleague said, laughing. Another added, "So is this the boy? Finally going to even out all that pink at your house?" Devon's response was carefully calibrated. "Just hoping for a healthy baby," he said, which was technically the right answer even though everyone knew it was a lie. The atmosphere was exactly what Jasmine had hoped for. Joyful, family-friendly, full of love. Children ran around the yard playing tag, their squeals punctuating adult conversations. Aaliyah and Jordan organized the younger kids into a game, their leadership showing despite their young ages. Music played from a portable speaker, a mix of Motown classics and contemporary R&B that got feet tapping. Aretha Franklin's Respect transitioned into Kirk Franklin's Love Theory, creating a soundtrack of celebration. Tables were covered with food, platters of barbecue ribs Devon's father had prepared, bowls of sides people had brought, Jasmine's mother's famous peach cobbler cooling on the dessert table, its sweet aroma mixing with the smell of grilled meat. Pink and blue balloons bobbed in the breeze. Everything was perfect. Everything was going exactly according to plan. Jasmine's plan for celebration, Devon's plan for murder. 2 plans operating simultaneously, invisible to everyone except the man with the syringe in his pocket. At 1:40, Beverly Johnson stood near the back fence talking to some of the church ladies about life in Detroit and her granddaughters. But even while engaged in conversation, she kept an eye on her daughter and son-in-law. Years of experience as a mother and nurse's aide had taught her to observe, to notice what others missed. And something about Devon's demeanor bothered her deeply. He was checking his watch repeatedly, every few minutes, as if waiting for something specific. When one of his parents tried to engage him in conversation about work, he gave short answers and kept glancing toward where Jasmine stood greeting guests. His body language was all wrong, tense, coiled, like a spring wound too tight. Beverly had spent 63 years on Earth, raised 3 children, survived an abusive first marriage before finding peace with Jasmine's father. She knew what predatory energy looked like, had developed instincts for danger that came from hard experience. And watching Devon at that moment, she felt a chill despite the summer heat that made her skin prickle with unease. She made a mental note to pull Jasmine aside before leaving tomorrow, to have a serious conversation about whether everything was really okay in this marriage, to push past Jasmine's defenses and insist on truth. Beverly had let her daughter stay in this marriage too long, had accepted too many excuses, had believed Jasmine when she said things were getting better. But standing there in that backyard, watching Devon's mechanical movements and cold eyes, Beverly felt a certainty settling in her bones. Something was very wrong. Something was about to happen. She didn't know what. Couldn't have imagined the horror that was 20 minutes away. But she felt it. She didn't know that in 20 minutes, she'd never get that chance to pull her daughter aside. She didn't know that in 20 minutes, her daughter would be dying in her arms while pink confetti floated through the air like twisted snow. At 1:55, with 5 minutes until the planned reveal, Jasmine called for everyone's attention. Her voice carried across the yard, cheerful and excited, cutting through various conversations. "Can everyone gather around? We're about to do the big reveal." At exactly 2:02 in the afternoon on July 27, 2019, Beverly Johnson triggered the confetti cannon. The mechanism released with a sharp pop, and pink confetti exploded into the air, shooting 15 feet high before beginning its slow descent back to Earth. For 1 perfect second, the backyard erupted in pure joy. Guests cheered and clapped, and whistled. Camera phones captured the moment from every angle. At least 15 people were recording, creating multiple perspectives that would later become evidence. Jasmine's 5 daughters jumped up and down screaming, "Another sister! Another sister!" The sound was deafening, overwhelming, exactly the kind of chaos Devon had been counting on. And in that moment, while every single person was looking up at the pink confetti floating through summer air like celebratory snow, Devon made his move. He stepped toward Jasmine with his arms open, the gesture looking natural, loving, exactly what a husband should do at this moment of announcement. Several guests watching would later comment on how sweet it looked, how romantic, the husband embracing his wife to celebrate their 6th child. Jasmine, caught up in celebration and seeing him approach, turned toward him with a smile that showed she still believed, even after everything, that her husband was capable of love. She stepped into his embrace willingly, putting her arms around his shoulders, expecting a hug of shared joy. Devon pulled her tight against him, one arm wrapped around her back, holding her close. His left arm did the work of embrace while his right arm prepared to execute murder. To the 38 witnesses watching, it looked like an intimate moment between husband and wife, a tender gesture during a happy occasion. Nobody noticed his right hand moving. Nobody saw the syringe emerge from his jacket pocket, concealed against his palm, needle pointing down. Nobody realized what was happening as Devon leaned in close, his mouth near Jasmine's ear, and whispered words only she could hear. "I told you to get rid of it." Then he struck. In one smooth motion, practiced dozens of times in his garage over the past month, Devon pressed the syringe against Jasmine's left side just below her ribs and depressed the plunger. The needle pierced her skin, penetrated muscle tissue, and 15 milliliters of industrial hydrochloric acid pumped directly into her bloodstream. The injection took less than 2 seconds. 1.8 seconds to be precise, exactly as he'd practiced. Devon withdrew the needle, slipped the syringe back into his jacket pocket in a motion that looked like nothing more than adjusting his jacket, and released Jasmine from his embrace, all while maintaining an expression of celebration on his face. Around them, people were still cheering, still watching confetti fall, still taking photos and videos, completely unaware they'd just witnessed a murder. Devon stepped back, creating space between himself and his wife, and waited for the acid to do its work. He knew from his research it would take 30 to 60 seconds for symptoms to manifest. He had time to establish distance, to position himself as observer rather than perpetrator. Jasmine felt it immediately, a burning sensation at the injection site that spread with terrifying speed through her torso. She touched her left side, confused, her face showing the first signs of distress. Her brain struggled to process what her body was feeling. Pain. Sharp. Chemical. Wrong. For 5 seconds, maybe 10, she tried to convince herself it was nothing. A muscle cramp, a pregnancy pain. Maybe she'd pulled something. The baby kicked hard, as if sensing danger. She even attempted to keep smiling, not wanting to ruin this perfect moment everyone had gathered to celebrate. But the pain intensified exponentially, spreading like wildfire through her cardiovascular system. The acid was traveling through her bloodstream at the speed of her own heartbeat, burning everything it touched from the inside out. 30 seconds after injection, Jasmine gasped audibly, a sound of pure agony that cut through the celebration noise. "Something's wrong," she said, her voice confused and frightened and already weakening. She looked at Devon, expecting him to help, to show concern, to be her husband in this moment of crisis. Instead, he stepped backward and said in a voice loud enough for nearby guests to hear, What's wrong? Are you okay?" His performance had begun. While his wife started dying in front of him, poisoned by his own hand, Devon played the role of confused, concerned husband to perfection. Other guests were starting to notice now, the cheering tapering off as people realized something was happening. Someone said, "Is she okay?" Another guest, seeing Jasmine's distress, moved closer. Monica, standing 15 feet away with her phone still raised from recording the confetti explosion, saw Jasmine's face go from confused to terrified in the space of 5 seconds. She pushed through the crowd, her maternal instincts overriding everything else. "Jasmine, what's happening?" Monica reached her friend just as Jasmine's legs buckled, her body beginning to shut down from the poison coursing through her system. Monica caught her before she fell completely, lowering her to the ground as Jasmine's body began convulsing. The screaming started then, Jasmine's voice raw with agony. "It burns! Oh God, it burns!" Her hands clutched at her side and abdomen, her face contorted in pain beyond anything Monica had ever seen in 34 years of life. The backyard transformed from celebration to chaos in under 10 seconds. Someone screamed, "Call 911!" and suddenly everyone was moving, some pressing forward to help, others pulling children away from the disturbing scene. Multiple people pulled out phones, fingers shaking as they dialed emergency services. Jasmine's daughters, who'd been playing nearby just seconds ago, were being pulled away by relatives, but they were screaming for their mother, reaching out with small hands, not understanding why Mommy was on the ground, why she was making those terrible sounds. Kennedy, at 13, understood more than the others, and the look on her face, absolute terror mixed with helpless horror, would haunt witnesses for years. Beverly Johnson dropped the empty confetti cannon and ran to her daughter, falling to her knees beside Monica in the grass that was already becoming damp with bodily fluids. Baby, what's wrong? Talk to me." But Jasmine was beyond talking. She was convulsing violently now, her body in full crisis, vomiting blood onto the grass as her organs began to fail. The skin at her left side, where the needle had entered, was already showing signs of chemical burn. Redness spreading, blistering beginning, the flesh literally being eaten away by the acid. The smell started to permeate the air around her, acrid and chemical, nothing like any natural bodily odor. One guest covered her nose and said, "What is that smell? What's happening to her?" 3 different guests actually called emergency services, their voices overlapping on the emergency lines. A woman collapsed at a party. She's pregnant. She's in bad shape. Something's wrong. She's screaming about burning. Please send someone fast. Hurry, please. I think she's dying. The 911 operators dispatched 2 ambulances immediately, marking it as a priority call due to the pregnancy and the distressing symptoms being described. Estimated arrival time, 9 minutes. But for Jasmine Carter, 9 minutes might as well have been 9 hours. The acid was destroying her organs, eating through tissue at the cellular level, causing catastrophic internal damage that no amount of emergency medicine could reverse. Her blood pressure was dropping precipitously. Her heart rate was spiking, then becoming irregular. Her body was shutting down system by system, like a building where the lights go out floor by floor until only darkness remains. Beverly Johnson held her daughter's head in her lap, stroking her hair with trembling hands, begging her to hold on. "Stay with me, baby. Help is coming. Just stay with me." Monica had Jasmine's hand, feeling her friend's pulse getting weaker with each passing second, watching her skin turn grayish as oxygen failed to reach her extremities. And Jasmine, in brief moments of semi-consciousness between waves of agony, kept saying the same thing over and over. "The baby. Save the baby. Please save the baby." At 2:09 in the afternoon, 7 minutes after the injection, the first ambulance arrived. 4 paramedics rushed into the backyard, pushing through the crowd of horrified guests with their equipment and stretcher. Lead paramedic Robert Hayes, a 15-year veteran with countless emergency calls under his belt, immediately recognized this was something unusual. They found a 35-year-old pregnant woman in severe distress, vital signs critically unstable. Blood pressure 60/40 and dropping. Heart rate 140 and irregular, showing signs of cardiac stress. Obvious signs of chemical exposure. The smell was unmistakable. The burns were visible. The symptoms were unlike anything Hayes had seen in typical medical emergencies. She had chemical burns, spreading from an injection site on her left side. The smell was wrong, sharp, acidic, industrial. Everything about this was wrong. This wasn't food poisoning or allergic reaction. This was chemical exposure, deliberate injection. They moved with practiced efficiency, loading Jasmine onto a gurney, starting IV fluids to try to stabilize her blood pressure, applying high-flow oxygen through a non-rebreather mask. The fetal heart monitor they strapped to her belly showed the baby in severe distress, heart rate dangerously low, decelerations indicating the unborn child was dying too. Devin, playing his part perfectly, stepped forward and asked if he could ride in the ambulance with his wife. The paramedics said yes, standard protocol. Only one person allowed in the ambulance, usually the spouse. Beverly Johnson had no choice but to let him go, standing in that backyard watching the ambulance doors close on her dying daughter, not knowing that the man riding alongside her was the reason she was dying. "Take care of her," Beverly called out as the doors closed. "Please take care of my baby." Devin nodded, gave her a look that was supposed to convey shared fear and hope, then disappeared into the ambulance. As the vehicle pulled away, lights flashing and siren wailing, Beverly collapsed onto the grass where her daughter had just been, surrounded by pink confetti and spilled blood, and screamed a mother's grief into the hot July afternoon. The ambulance screamed through Philadelphia streets toward Einstein Medical Center, navigating Saturday afternoon traffic with lights and sirens, forcing cars to pull aside. 15 minutes away, but those 15 minutes felt eternal. In the back of the vehicle, Hayes worked frantically to stabilize Jasmine, while his partner, Jennifer Lopez, drove with controlled urgency. Hayes had seen countless medical emergencies, heart attacks, strokes, trauma from car accidents, overdoses, anaphylactic reactions. But this was different. The progression was too fast, too severe, too obviously chemical in nature. The burns on her torso were spreading, blistering, the flesh literally being destroyed by something caustic. The chemical smell was unmistakable, filling the enclosed space of the ambulance despite ventilation systems. Hayes kept asking Devin questions, trying to understand what they were dealing with, trying to piece together information that might help the ER doctors save this woman's life. "Does your wife have any known allergies? Did she eat or drink anything unusual today? Has she been exposed to any chemicals at home? Any household cleaners, industrial products, anything?" Devin, sitting near Jasmine's feet with his hands folded in his lap, answered each question in a voice that was almost too calm. "No, nothing. No allergies I know of. She ate breakfast this morning. Just pancakes and bacon. We were having a party. Everything was normal. I don't understand what's happening." His responses were appropriate, technically correct, but something about his demeanor set off alarm bells in Hayes's experienced mind. Most people in this situation would be hysterical, crying, demanding answers, touching their loved one, showing visible distress. Some people shut down emotionally, sure, went into shock, became quiet. But this was different. Devin sat still, answered questions in monotone, and barely looked at his dying wife. When Jasmine moaned in pain, a sound that should have torn at any husband's heart, he didn't reach for her hand. When her body convulsed, he didn't flinch, didn't show any emotional response. Hayes made a mental note of this, something to mention to the doctors when they arrived. People processed trauma differently, absolutely, but this felt wrong. This felt calculated. At 2:30 in the afternoon, the ambulance pulled into the emergency bay at Einstein Medical Center. The trauma team was waiting, having been alerted by Hayes's radio call. Jasmine was rushed directly to Trauma Bay 1, a flurry of activity as nurses and doctors surrounded her, attaching monitors, starting additional IV lines, performing rapid assessment. Dr. Raymond Sullivan was waiting, a 20-year veteran of emergency medicine who'd seen everything from gunshot wounds to catastrophic car accidents. But when he got his first look at Jasmine Carter, when he saw the chemical burn spreading across her torso and smelled the acidic odor coming from her body, despite the oxygen mask and the blood and the vomit, he knew this was something he'd never encountered before. "What are we looking at?" he asked the paramedics as they transferred Jasmine to the trauma bed. Hayes briefed him quickly, efficiently, his voice showing the strain of the last 20 minutes. 35-year-old female, 20 weeks pregnant, sudden collapse at party, following what appears to be injection of caustic chemical, left side below ribs. Chemical burns at injection site spreading. Vitals critically unstable and declining despite interventions. Blood pressure barely detectable. Cardiac rhythm unstable. Respiratory failure imminent. Sullivan's face darkened. Burns at an injection site meant someone had injected her with something caustic. Someone had done this deliberately. This wasn't an accident or a medical emergency. This was poisoning. This was attempted murder. And looking at her declining vitals, it was going to be successful murder unless they could pull off a miracle. At 3:12 in the afternoon, Jasmine Carter's sixth daughter was delivered via emergency cesarean section performed in the trauma bay. The tiny infant, 20 weeks gestational age, weighed 1 pound and 14 ounces. She was far too premature to survive outside the womb. Her lungs not developed enough to breathe even with maximum respiratory support. Her organs too underdeveloped to sustain life. The neonatal team tried everything: warming blankets to maintain body temperature, oxygen support, gentle stimulation, to encourage breathing, medications to support heart function. But it was hopeless from the start. The baby girl, poisoned in utero by the same acid that was killing her mother, never took a single breath of air. At 3:19 in the afternoon, 7 minutes after delivery, she was pronounced dead. Dr. Sullivan, who delivered thousands of babies in his career and prided himself on maintaining professional distance, had to step out of the trauma bay for a moment to compose himself. This wasn't medicine. This was murder. A mother and her unborn child killed by poison, and he'd been powerless to save either of them. Jasmine fought for 22 more minutes. Her heart, damaged beyond repair by the acid that had coursed through her system and destroyed tissue at the cellular level, couldn't sustain the effort anymore. Her organs had shut down one by one: liver, kidneys, intestines, leaving nothing functional to keep her alive. The medical team had done everything possible, but some injuries are incompatible with life. At 3:41 in the afternoon, surrounded by a medical team that had exhausted every option in their arsenal, Jasmine Carter was pronounced dead. She was 35 years old. She'd been pregnant with a daughter she'd loved fiercely, had fought to protect, had refused to abort despite pressure from her husband. She'd spent her last morning making pancakes for her 5 children, decorating a backyard for a party, believing that her husband had finally come around and accepted their growing family. And she died in agony, poisoned by the man she'd married 13 years ago, betrayed in the cruelest way imaginable. Dr. Sullivan had the devastating task of informing the husband. He found Devin in the waiting room, still sitting in that plastic chair, still staring at his phone, seemingly calm in a situation where most people would be pacing, crying, demanding updates. Dr. Sullivan sat down beside him, his own face showing the weight of what he had to say, the exhaustion of fighting a battle they'd lost. "Mr. Carter, I'm Dr. Sullivan. I need to speak with you." Devin looked up, his face arranged into an expression of dread that looked rehearsed, practiced. "Is she okay? Is the baby okay?" Sullivan took a breath, chose his words carefully. "I'm so sorry. We did everything we could, but your wife's injuries were too severe. The chemical exposure caused multi-organ failure. We weren't able to save her. We delivered the baby by emergency cesarean, but she was too premature. We lost her as well. I'm sorry for your loss." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with finality. Devin put his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking as if crying, the performance of a grieving husband. But the nurse standing nearby, who'd been watching from across the waiting room, would later testify about what she observed. "I was looking right at him when the doctor told him. His shoulders were shaking like he was sobbing. But when I got closer to offer him tissues, I didn't see any actual tears. His face was dry. He was performing grief, not feeling it. In all my years as a nurse, I've seen people process death in many different ways, but this wasn't processing. This was acting." Devin finally looked up, his eyes appropriately red from rubbing them, but, as the nurse noted, conspicuously dry. "Both of them? They're both gone?" Dr. Sullivan nodded gravely. "Yes, I'm so sorry," Devin asked in a voice barely above a whisper. "Can I see her? Can I see my wife?" They allowed him 5 minutes in the room where Jasmine's body lay, covered by a white sheet. But what happened in those 5 minutes would become evidence of his guilt. Devin stood at the doorway, didn't approach the bed, didn't touch his dead wife, didn't pull back the sheet to see her face one last time. He just stood there, checking his watch twice, looking around the room as if cataloging details. Then after exactly 3 minutes, not 5, but 3, said he couldn't handle it and needed to leave. That reaction, or lack of reaction, combined with everything else, would paint a picture of a man who'd just successfully executed a murder and was calculating his next moves rather than grieving his losses. Dr. Sullivan pulled aside the charge nurse immediately after Devin left the room. "Call security. Have them contact police. This was homicide." The nurse's eyes went wide with shock. "How do you know? Are you sure?" Sullivan showed her the medical charts, pointed to the toxicology results that had come back showing hydrochloric acid in Jasmine's bloodstream, the injection site that was clearly deliberate, the pattern of internal burns that indicated caustic chemical exposure. Someone injected her with industrial acid. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't an allergic reaction. This wasn't some random medical emergency. Someone murdered this woman and her baby. Hospital security immediately contacted Philadelphia PD. Detective Brenda Washington, who'd already been on her way to the hospital with mounting concerns about the husband based on witness statements from the party, got the call that confirmed her worst suspicions. She arrived at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and went directly to the morgue, where Dr. Sullivan was waiting to walk her through the findings in detail. The injection site, a precise puncture wound indicating deliberate action rather than accident. The hydrochloric acid found in blood and tissue samples, industrial concentration, not something found in household products. The catastrophic internal damage, organs literally dissolved from the inside out by caustic chemical exposure. The timeline, symptoms manifesting within seconds of injection. Rapid progression indicating high concentration and significant dosage. Washington listened, her face hardening with each detail, her 20 years of detective experience telling her exactly what had happened here. "I need to talk to the husband. Now." They found Devin in the hospital chapel, sitting in a pew with his head bowed as if in prayer, the picture of a grieving man seeking solace. Washington and her partner, Detective James Thompson, approached quietly and sat down on either side of him, effectively boxing him in. Washington introduced herself and Thompson, expressed condolences that sounded genuine despite her suspicions, and then asked if Devin would be willing to answer some questions to help them understand what happened to his wife. He agreed immediately, too immediately for someone who'd just lost his wife and child. "Of course. Anything to help. I don't understand what happened. She was fine, and then she just collapsed." They moved to a small conference room, and for the next 90 minutes, Washington and Thompson interviewed him methodically, building their case piece by piece. Devin's story was consistent. They'd had a gender reveal party, everything was normal and happy. Jasmine collapsed suddenly during the celebration. He had no idea why. He'd tried to help. He'd ridden in the ambulance. He'd waited desperately for news. His narrative was practiced, smooth, hitting all the right emotional notes. But his body language told a different story. No tears, despite the red eyes from rubbing. No trembling hands. No emotional breakdown. Just calm, calculated responses delivered in a flat tone that showed no genuine grief. When Washington told him the doctors believed Jasmine had been poisoned by injection of industrial acid, Devin's micro-expression gave him away. For just a fraction of a second, maybe a quarter of a second, but Washington had been watching for exactly this. His eyes widened with surprise. Not surprise that she'd been poisoned. Surprise that they'd figured it out so quickly. That momentary expression told Washington everything she needed to know. This man had poisoned his wife. Now she just needed to prove it. Washington changed tactics, moving from sympathetic interviewer to interrogator. "Where were you when your wife collapsed, Mr. Carter?" Devin answered carefully, having rehearsed this response. "I was right next to her. We'd just done the confetti reveal. Everyone was cheering. I hugged her to celebrate, and then seconds later, she started having problems. I don't know what happened." Thompson leaned forward, his voice harder now. "So you were the closest person to her at the moment she was injected?" The word injected hung in the air, heavy with implication. Devin hesitated, just for a second, realizing the trap. "I guess so, yes. But I didn't inject her with anything." Why would I hurt my wife? Washington watched his hands as she delivered the next question. Mr. Carter, would you mind if we took your jacket? For evidence. We're collecting items from everyone who was at the party. She held her breath. If he refused, they'd need a warrant, which would take time and give him opportunity to dispose of evidence. But Devin, overconfident in his plan and believing the syringe in his pocket would look like just another piece of clothing if handled properly, agreed. Of course, anything to help find out who did this. He removed the jacket, handed it over with steady hands, and in that moment, sealed his fate. Washington held the jacket carefully, felt the weight of something in the inner pocket, and her eyes met Thompson's across the table. They had something. They had evidence. They thanked Devin for his cooperation, told him not to leave the Philadelphia area, and said they'd be in touch. Devin left around 5:30, his parents driving him back to Levittown while he sat in the back seat, wondering if he'd made any mistakes, running through his plan looking for flaws. Washington rushed the jacket to the forensic lab at police headquarters, where lead analyst Angela Davis was waiting, already briefed on the case. Davis opened the inner pocket carefully, methodically, documenting every step with photographs. She withdrew what was inside, a cloth-wrapped object, carefully concealed. She unwrapped it slowly under controlled conditions. A medical syringe, nearly empty, but with visible residue inside the barrel. She immediately called Washington with the news they'd both been hoping for. We've got the murder weapon. It was in his jacket pocket the whole time. He literally handed us the evidence. By Sunday evening, July 28th, forensic teams had processed everything and the case had gone from suspected homicide to slam-dunk prosecution. The syringe contained hydrochloric acid residue that matched perfectly with the chemical signature found in Jasmine's blood. Same concentration, same compound, forensically identical. Search warrants were executed on Devin's house, his car, and his workplace. Digital forensic specialists recovered the deleted search history from all his devices. Months of research about miscarriage, chemical poisoning, acid injection, creating an undeniable timeline of premeditation. Security footage from the industrial supply store in Camden showed him purchasing acid on June 24th. Pharmacy footage showed him buying syringes on June 26th. A neighbor's security camera, positioned to monitor their own property but with a view angle that captured part of the Carter backyard, had recorded the party. Enhanced footage showed the moment of injection with timestamp 2:02:31 p.m. Devin's hand moving to his pocket, the embrace, Jasmine's immediate distress. Every piece of evidence pointed to one person, one killer, one husband who'd murdered his pregnant wife because she wouldn't abort a daughter he didn't want. By Monday morning, July 29th, the district attorney's office had assembled everything they needed for charges. At 5:30 in the morning, Judge Angela Morrison signed an arrest warrant for Devin Carter on 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of aggravated assault, 1 count of weapons possession for unlawful purpose, and 2 counts of endangering the welfare of children. At 6 o'clock, Detective Washington led a team of 5 uniformed officers to the Carter residence. Devin was already awake, drinking coffee in the kitchen, going through the motions of normal morning routine. When he opened the door and saw the police, his face registered surprise but quickly shifted to confusion, still playing the role, still performing. Washington didn't give him time to continue the charade. Devin Carter, you're under arrest for the murders of Jasmine Carter and her unborn child. She read him his Miranda rights while officers handcuffed him in his own kitchen. They led him to the police car while Beverly Johnson stood at the upstairs window, shielding the 5 girls from seeing their father arrested, her heart breaking for her granddaughters who'd lost their mother and were now losing their father too, though in vastly different ways. 8 months after Jasmine Carter's murder, in March 2020, Devin Carter's trial began at the Philadelphia County Courthouse. The case had garnered national attention, with major news outlets calling it the gender reveal murder and using it as a springboard for discussions about domestic violence and toxic masculinity. The courthouse was packed every single day, with Jasmine's family occupying the front row on the prosecution side, while Devin's parents sat alone on the defense side. Devin had retained Thomas Mitchell, a high-profile defense attorney known for taking impossible cases. But even Mitchell knew This was an uphill battle. The evidence wasn't just strong, it was overwhelming. The prosecution was led by Lawrence Bryant, a veteran ADA with a conviction rate that made defense attorneys nervous. His opening statement laid out the case in devastating detail. Ladies and gentlemen, this wasn't a crime of passion. This was calculated, premeditated murder. For months, Devin Carter researched how to kill his pregnant wife because she refused to abort their sixth daughter. He bought the weapon. He practiced the technique. He created the opportunity. And on July 27, 2019, while 38 people celebrated new life, Devin Carter injected his wife with poison and watched her die. The evidence will show you exactly how he did it, why he did it, and that he's guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. The prosecution's case took 3 weeks and included 42 witnesses. Medical examiner Dr. Patricia Lewis testified about the autopsy findings, using diagrams to show how the acid traveled through Jasmine's cardiovascular system, destroying organs. She showed photographs of the injection site and internal damage. Several jurors looked away. Dr. Sullivan testified about his desperate attempts to save Jasmine and the baby, his voice breaking when he described realizing both were beyond saving. Angela Davis walked the jury through the evidence: the syringe found in Devin's jacket, the acid residue that matched Jasmine's blood chemistry. But perhaps the most damaging testimony came from digital forensics specialist Michael Torres, who presented Devin's search history to the jury. Torres had recovered months of deleted searches, and he displayed them chronologically on a large screen. April 15, 2019. Natural miscarriage causes. May 2nd. Chemical miscarriage induction. June 3rd. Acid injection death time frame. Each search appeared with timestamps, building an undeniable picture of premeditation. Bryant asked Torres directly, "In your expert opinion, what do these searches indicate?" Torres answered clearly. "They indicate someone researching how to commit murder and get away with it. Someone who spent months planning." The prosecution also called witnesses about Devin's obsession with having a son. Trevor, his co-worker, described years of listening to Devin complain about having only daughters. Monica testified about years of abuse she'd witnessed, the financial control, the isolation, the bruises. She read from text messages Jasmine had sent her days before the murder. "I'm scared. He's being too nice. Something feels wrong." The courtroom was silent, except for crying. Beverly Johnson gave the most powerful testimony. She spoke for 2 hours about her daughter's life, her dreams, her love for her children. When she described holding Jasmine as she died in the backyard, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom except for Devin's. The prosecution's final piece of evidence was surveillance footage from the neighbor's security camera. The video quality wasn't perfect, but enhanced footage showed enough. The timestamp read 2:02:30 p.m. Devin approached Jasmine, embraced her, and his right hand moved in a motion consistent with injection. Jasmine's reaction was immediate. Bryant played the video 3 times. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the moment Devin Carter murdered his wife and unborn daughter." The defense's case was weak. Mitchell called character witnesses who testified Devin seemed like a good person, but under cross-examination, Bryant dismantled each one. He got Devin's father to admit he'd raised his son to believe having sons was more important than daughters. Finally, against his attorney's advice, Devin insisted on testifying. It was the worst decision he could have made. On the stand, Devin tried to maintain innocence while claiming he'd been under extreme stress. Bryant's cross-examination was surgical. "Mr. Carter, you testified you loved your wife. Is that why you called her worthless for giving you daughters?" Devin stumbled. By the time Bryant finished, Devin had revealed his true self: cold, controlling, someone who believed his wife had forced him into murder. The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours. When they returned, the forepersons spoke clearly. "We find the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree on both counts. Guilty on all 8 charges. 0 acquittals." Devin was led away in handcuffs. 6 weeks later, at sentencing, Judge Helen Morrison sentenced him to life in prison without possibility of parole on both murder counts, to run consecutively, plus an additional 30 years. You will die in prison, Mr. Carter. You have forfeited every right to family, to freedom, to any life outside prison walls. The gavel came down. Devin Carter, age 37, was remanded to Pennsylvania State Prison for the remainder of his natural life. The 5 Carter daughters, now orphaned in every way that mattered, stayed with their maternal grandmother Beverly, who fought off a custody challenge from Devin's parents and won full guardianship. The girls ranged in age from 5 to 14, each processing trauma differently. Kennedy, the eldest at 14, suffered severe PTSD and nightmares. She started therapy 3 times a week and slowly began to heal. She became fiercely protective of her younger sisters, taking on a maternal role too heavy for a teenager. Aaliyah, 12, stopped speaking for 3 months after the trial verdict. Art therapy eventually helped her find her voice again, and she started creating paintings that processed her grief. Jordan, 9, struggled with misplaced guilt, believing if she'd been a boy, her mother would still be alive. Therapy helped her understand her father's toxicity wasn't her fault. Taylor, 7, developed severe separation anxiety, terrified that her grandmother would disappear too. She clung to Beverly constantly, needed reassurance multiple times daily. Skylar, the youngest at 5, was still asking for her mother a year after the murder, struggling to understand why Mommy wasn't coming home. Beverly had to explain repeatedly that Mommy was in heaven and loved her very much. It was heartbreaking work, raising 5 traumatized granddaughters while grieving her own daughter's murder. But Beverly did it with strength and love, creating a stable home where the girls could heal. She also created the Jasmine Carter Foundation, a non-profit supporting domestic violence survivors. If one woman escapes because of Jasmine's story, then her death won't be meaningless, Beverly told reporters. 5 years after Jasmine's murder, in July 2024, the 5 Carter sisters were thriving in ways that honored their mother's memory. Kennedy had just turned 18 and been accepted to Howard University, her mother's alma mater, on a full scholarship to study biomedical engineering, her mother's field. She planned to continue Jasmine's dream of developing affordable medical devices. "I'm doing this for her," Kennedy told a local newspaper. "She never got to finish what she started. I'm going to finish it for her." Aaliyah, 17, was pursuing art therapy as a career path, wanting to help other traumatized children heal through creativity. Jordan, 14, had found peace through soccer and was thriving on her school's team. Taylor, 12, was an avid reader who found escape in books about strong women. And Skylar, 10, wanted to be a doctor, like Mommy was going to be, keeping a photo of Jasmine on her nightstand. Beverly, now 68, had devoted her retirement to raising her granddaughters and running the foundation. The work was exhausting but meaningful. She'd helped hundreds of women leave abusive situations, provided financial assistance and legal support, created safe houses and counseling services. Every woman saved was a tribute to Jasmine. The foundation also did educational work, teaching people to recognize signs of domestic violence before it escalated to murder, financial control, isolation, verbal abuse, escalating anger, all the red flags present in Jasmine's marriage. "We can't bring Jasmine back," Beverly said in a foundation video, "but we can save other women. That's Jasmine's legacy." As for Devin Carter, he was exactly where he deserved to be. At age 42, incarcerated at State Correctional Institution Phoenix, a maximum security prison, he'd settled into the reality of life without freedom. Other inmates knew what he'd done, and they didn't treat him well. He'd been involved in multiple disciplinary infractions, spent time in solitary confinement, and filed 2 appeals that were both denied. The evidence against him was too overwhelming. He would die in prison, and every single day between now and that death would be a consequence of his choice to poison his wife. Reports from prison indicated he showed no remorse, told other inmates his wife should have listened, maintained that the real victims were men like him who felt trapped by unwanted children. The house in Levittown where the murder happened was sold in 2021. The new owners had no idea about the property's history. The backyard where Jasmine died had been completely renovated, New grass, new fence, new landscaping. The spot where she fell was now a children's play area with a swing set. But in a small park 3 blocks away, there's a memorial bench dedicated to Jasmine Carter and her unborn daughter. The plaque reads, "In loving memory of Jasmine Carter and baby Carter. May their story inspire us to protect the vulnerable and speak up against domestic violence." People still leave flowers there, 6 pink roses, 1 for each daughter, including the one who never breathed. The case changed conversations nationally. Gender reveal parties came under scrutiny, but more importantly, the case sparked conversations about domestic violence, financial abuse, isolation tactics, and warning signs people miss or ignore. Organizations use Jasmine's story in training materials for healthcare workers, teachers, social workers. "This is what escalation looks like," the materials explained. "This is how you intervene before it's too late." If even one person recognized those patterns and got help before tragedy struck, then her death accomplished something beyond being a cautionary tale. There are questions about this case that will never be fully answered. Was this the first time Devon tried to harm Jasmine? Medical records show she was hospitalized twice during her 5th pregnancy in 2014 for unexplained stomach illness that doctors couldn't diagnose. At the time, it was written off as severe morning sickness. But knowing what we know now, knowing Devon had been researching methods, knowing he'd poisoned her during the 6th pregnancy, those hospitalizations take on different meaning. Investigators looked into it after his arrest, but there was no way to prove anything 5 years later. Medical samples had been destroyed. Evidence was gone. But Beverly Johnson believes those mysterious illnesses were early attempts. He'd been trying to hurt her for years. We just didn't see it. How many opportunities did people miss to save Jasmine? Friends who noticed bruises but accepted explanations about being clumsy. Family members who sensed something wrong but didn't push hard enough. Co-workers who heard concerning comments but didn't report them. Neighbors who heard arguments through walls but minded their own business. The school counselor who noted Kennedy's anxiety but didn't investigate home life thoroughly. Trevor, Devon's colleague, who saw research about miscarriage and thought it was strange but didn't tell anyone. Monica, who knew Jasmine was scared in those final weeks but respected her friend's choice to stay. Each of these people carries guilt, wondering if they'd acted differently. Could they have saved her? The answer is probably yes. With domestic violence, early intervention saves lives. Could this have been prevented? Domestic violence experts say absolutely. When the financial control started in 2007, if Jasmine had recognized it as economic abuse rather than practical budgeting, she could have established separate accounts. When verbal abuse began in 2010, if church friends had confronted Devon or offered Jasmine resources, she might have left. When bruises appeared in 2012, if Monica had called police instead of just expressing concern, an investigation might have started. When Kennedy's school counselor noted trauma at home in 2015, if social services had gotten involved, the pattern might have been interrupted. When Jasmine confided her fear to her mother in March 2019, if Beverly had physically gone to Philadelphia and removed her daughter by force if necessary, Jasmine would still be alive. These interventions require people to be informed, brave, and willing to act even when uncomfortable. The broader lessons from Jasmine's murder extend far beyond one family's tragedy. About domestic violence. It's often invisible until too late, escalating slowly enough that victims normalize abuse. It frequently involves financial control, which traps victims by making them economically dependent. It includes isolation tactics that separate victims from support systems, and it kills. 3 women daily in America die from domestic violence. We must believe victims. We must provide resources. We must intervene early. About gender preferences and toxic masculinity. Devon's obsession with having a son wasn't unusual. Many men feel societal pressure to produce male heirs. What was unusual was how far he took it. But the underlying toxic belief that sons matter more than daughters exists across cultures and needs to be challenged. Children aren't possessions or legacy vehicles. They're human beings deserving love, regardless of gender. About warning signs we must recognize. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong in a relationship you're observing, speak up. Don't worry about being intrusive. One conversation could save a life. Specific red flags include partner controlling money, making someone account for every purchase, partner isolating their spouse from friends and family, partner showing explosive anger over small things, partner blaming spouse for things beyond their control, partner tracking movements, partner making spouse ask permission for basic activities, partner showing extreme gender disappointment. Any of these behaviors, especially in combination, signal danger. If you see them in someone's relationship, offer support, provide resources, help create a safety plan. If you're experiencing them yourself, know that you deserve better and help exists. According to the CDC, homicide is a leading cause of death for pregnant women in America. Domestic violence increases during pregnancy, particularly if the pregnancy is unplanned or unwanted. Financial abuse affects 99% of domestic violence survivors. Most women murdered by intimate partners had experienced escalating abuse before the fatal incident, meaning these deaths are preventable if we intervene early. Jasmine's case wasn't an anomaly. It was just the one that made headlines. How many other women died at the hands of partners in July 2019? These aren't just statistics. They're mothers, daughters, sisters, friends with dreams and futures who were erased by violence. Every single death was preventable. Jasmine Carter's legacy isn't just about how she died. It's about how she lived, brilliantly, hopefully, loving her daughters, fiercely. It's about the foundation bearing her name that saved hundreds of women. It's about Kennedy studying biomedical engineering, continuing her mother's dream. It's about 5 daughters choosing love and strength. It's about conversations happening nationally, about people recognizing warning signs, about women leaving dangerous situations before it's too late. If we honor Jasmine's legacy by saving lives, by believing victims, by refusing to stay silent in the face of abuse, then maybe her death can prevent others. Thank you so much for watching Jasmine's story. We know this was difficult, but stories like hers need to be told so we can recognize warning signs and save lives. If this documentary impacted you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with others.